be connectivity issues with Wi-Fi connection that may cause presenters, support team, or participants to go offline. Unfortunately, this is beyond our control, but we are leaning on backup support from our team overseas to keep the session going till it's finished. Also very important that when each session is completed, a link will be emailed to all our participants to complete an evaluation survey. This link will also be shared in the chat box provided in this platform. Please complete this survey immediately after this session and get it out of your to-do list. It's very easy to fill in and takes at least 10 minutes to complete and submit. Also, to allow our presenters to complete their presentations, we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. Please make sure to mute your mic during the presentations until it's time for you to ask your question or make a comment. But you can also use the chat box to submit your questions for discussion. And lastly, we want to take a screenshot photo of the group before we start the team presentation. Can you please turn your cameras on, and Ivan, will you take the photo?
Yes, please. Can we have our participants please turn on their cameras kindly, if you don't mind?
Ivan, you able to see everybody on? How many can you see on the screen?
Yes. Can you take it from your end, Greg? I'm not seeing everything full here.
Because my view at the moment, I'm just getting the slides still.
Okay, I can see everyone now. Just go ahead and see your lovely faces.
Yeah, some of us are getting camera shy, mate.
All right, that's
you
fine.
Take your shirt off later, mate.
All right, that's fine. We got the photo now, so we can proceed.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so without further ado, over to you, Miss Jean and the team. Tele for your patience, everyone.
Talofa, and thank you very much, Ofera, for that introduction. So hi, everybody. I'm Jean, and as Ofera mentioned, I work in the Pacific Department of Asian Development Bank, and I've been working very, very closely with Rachel in the World Bank, and also Mia Pallo, who has recently taken up a role within PRIF. And it is through PRIF, the Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility, and the working group established thereunder that we actually developed what we now refer to as the shared approach. And this is what I'm going to run through with you this afternoon. So this is what the document that has finally been published looks like. And in terms of how we got there, I had been working very, very closely with Ross Butler of World Bank prior to his departure up to Beijing office. And he and I often used to say, look, we're approached all the time by our PIC colleagues and governments asking us, why can't we harmonize our systems a lot more? Why do we need this plethora of approaches when really we're talking about our policies that are effectively same, but different? The intent's the same, the purpose is the same. We might have a few little differences and nuances in terms of how we approach things, but at the end of the day, we're talking about the same sorts of requirements. There are many challenges that in the Pacific, small governments and small project management units, small regulatory agencies, and so we can overburden very, very quickly these people by demanding that they read huge and very repetitive documents. We also were trying to find out, is there a shared way that we can approach capacity development and institutional strengthening? So we were sort of thinking about these things. How are we going to address these challenges? The World Bank had come up with a set of simplified procedures, and that was a really, really good effort, and they were worthwhile, but they were very World Bank focused, so they weren't really appropriate for other development partners to easily implement. So we wanted to unpack that whole sort of simplified procedures approach a bit more and have a look at what was really needed. And we decided that what was needed was much more of a project delivery tool rather than focusing on, as previously had been done, development partners processing requirements. So what we needed was what I like to refer to as a front of house tool. So we wanted to know, well, how are we going to go about this? What was going to be this conduit for developing this approach and coming up with a collaborative and coordinated approach to capacity development in the Pacific. So we looked at the Pacific Region Infrastructure Facility, which had been established in 2008 as a technical assistance funded by ADB initially, and it was a coordination mechanism for all of the development partners working with PICs on infrastructure in the Pacific. So currently, the PRIF members are there. The United States is the most recent member. All the other members have been there since the beginning, and we pretty much cover all of the Pacific countries with the exclusion of PNG, which is also in the World Bank and ADB portfolio. It's a map of the countries covered by PRIF. So the development of the shared approach, we established a safeguards working group under the umbrella of PRIF, and starting in about 2014, 2015, we collaborated on what was originally referred to as the common approach and then morphed into the shared approach. And what that is it's a common understanding of guidance and ways to address environmental and social safeguard risks and impacts in the infrastructure development. So the status of the document was that we had pretty much ready to go by 2019, and then we were held up by the US, who for various reasons took quite a while to put forward some quite minor, relatively speaking, changes that they wanted made. We had a publication ready document all set to go. That was launched as a soft launch, if you like, in a community of practice meeting in Jakarta in November 2019. And it was finally launched online after being approved by the PRIF's Project Management Committee. It was published online in June 2021. So the purpose of the shared approach is pretty much what Ophira mentioned in her introduction. It's to provide an agreed and robust approach to managing E&S risks and impacts in the Pacific. It's to improve efficiency and effectiveness for countries and development partners in undertaking measures to address risks and impacts, and also helping streamline coordination and collaboration on implementing mitigation measures for addressing those risks. There are three key objectives of the shared approach, and that is around this idea of identifying and using agreed and common methods and procedures. And that's particularly looking at trying to come up with one set of terminology for what we commonly accept as, the various safeguard instruments, and using terms that are more readily understood by our Pacific colleagues. Supporting countries' safeguard systems, working from the premise that the country safeguard systems are there, we recognize them, we need to comply with them equally as our own individual policies. So we want to focus on what perhaps the gaps are, rather than talking about development partners policy first and country safeguard systems second, which kind of had really been the approach up to this point. And also looking at collaboratively developing capacity for ENS risk and impact implementation across the region. So in terms of what the benefits of the shared approach are, oh, sorry, what have I done here? Benefits of the shared approach, sorry, flipped one on. So for our Pacific Island countries, more efficient and effective project delivery by focusing and applying on good industry practice, use of a common terminology and use of common tools and instruments, as well as common procedures and processes, and helping to improve the understanding of our counterparts of the gaps that are important in the development partners policies over and above CSS, and strengthening and assisting our Pacific Island countries to apply their own CSS. So 3 key features of the shared approach are that it's very much rooted in the notion of land and natural resources being a scarce resource in the Pacific, and that many of our Pacific Indigenous communities have a very deep and revered attachment to land and natural resources. It's based in and recognises the importance of traditional leadership and decision-making practices. So that flows through very keenly into things like the grievance redress mechanism, trying to embed that in traditional processes as much and as far as possible. And also recognising and emphasising the importance of the communities themselves, the beneficiaries of these projects in the design and implementation of development activities. So the application of the shared approach is very much geared towards sovereign operations as opposed to private sector operations, but there's no reason why it can't be applied in private sector operations, because it's fundamentally adopting good approaches and standard and accepted procedures for ENS impact and risk identification and mitigation planning. It looks at special issues such as community, land ownership, and IP in the Pacific. Also is very cognizant of the special and often heightened role that contractors are expected to play, because we don't have a lot of people in the Pacific, and we find that we're working with agencies that are understaffed and overwhelmed very much a lot of the time. So we need to rely on contractors a lot more than we necessarily would in other places. And it's firmly rooted in the whole idea of the project cycle. So the framework is based on, as I mentioned, an accepted approach to risk management, looking at screening and early screening and identification of risks at design stage, having an understanding of the magnitude of those risks and what that means for the types of instruments and plans and tools that we're going to require to deal with those risks in implementation. And of course, we want to encourage community inputs and stakeholder engagement and participation throughout the process, from the concept through the design into implementation, and then of course, monitoring the effectiveness of the implementation. So it's embedded in the project cycle, and why we decided to take that approach was it's fairly well understood by pretty much anybody involved in projects, designing and implementing projects. So we thought it wouldn't be strange to then be starting to talk about some of these concepts and ideas with engineers and project managers. While they're not necessarily familiar with safeguards, they're certainly very familiar with this, with the various stages of the project cycle. And so they're more likely to be open to seeing the different entry points for safeguards in the different stages of the overall cycle. Also, we define the different roles and responsibilities of the various stakeholders and parties at each stage of the project cycle. So just so you know what you're looking at in the document, I'm not quite sure. Oh yeah, that hasn't come out too badly because I had to cut and paste this from the document itself. So I'm not going to talk in great detail, but I just want you to have an understanding of what this looks like in the actual document. So we've broken down the various inputs, if you like, across the top. So the general activities, the ENS assessment, stakeholder engagement, grievance redress, all the disclosure requirements, access to land, and then the responsibilities and roles on the end. And that's mapped through for each row, which is the stages of the project cycle. And we've also got fairly recognized milestones for each of those. So moving here to preparation and assessment during the design, moving on to procurement and then construction. So we're working with these same inputs and principles across the top, and just showing the different requirements at the different stages. Okay, so to round off then, a bit about what the shared approach is, and more importantly, what it isn't, because I get asked all the time, oh my goodness, is it okay that you're running off the reservation like this and you're kind of trying to put in place this quite different thing? Well, my immediate response is it's not different at all. It isn't. We're just trying to take it back to basics and have a set of common approaches, terminology, and procedures, much more firmly based in country systems. The shared approach has been approved by all of the PRIF development partners for use across projects, and we're already trialing it in a few projects. And we had actually been using it prior to it being finalized and formally approved. So we have got quite a bit of experience in how it works now when we're co-financing a project, and we might have 2 or 3 development partners working together. So we're getting a good idea of how it is sort of rocking out in the real world. So what it isn't is it's not an alternate safeguard policy. It's not a substitution of development partners' policies, and it's not a modification of, an amendment to, or a dilution of existing safeguards policies. What it is an approach. It is a harmonized approach based on country systems. So I'll wrap it up there. Oh, next steps. Sorry, I thought that was my final slide. So Mia Pallo can talk a little bit more about the 2 accompanying TAs, the supporting TAs, which PRIF is currently financing as part of the rollout. And I just want to take my hat off again to the Pacific Learning Partnership, which is a key platform for partner coordination in terms of training and skills and capacity development in the ENS sectors in the Pacific. The ADB is also financing a regional safeguards TA, and part of that is developing a regional strategy for capacity development, which will hopefully become the roadmap which all development partners can contribute to as it aligns with their previous support and their portfolios. So that again is giving voice to a number of elements of the shared approach. It will remain a live document and will be updated following some monitoring and evaluation, which will be undertaken after we've got a few more projects implemented through the shared approach under our belt. So that is the end. So I will thank you very much. and hand it over now to Mia Pello and Rachel as well for any Q&A.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jean.
Thank you, Jean. So any questions?
Mia Pello, did you just want to do a little, just a bit of a brief overview of the TA that PRIF are financing to support the
Right,
rollout
yeah.
of the shared approach?
So I've got all right. So I've got a bit of a patchy connection. So yes. So thanks, Jean, for that. That was really good presentation. Hi, everyone. So at the moment, part of the work that we're looking at focusing to see how we can promote and socialize the shared approach as much as possible. Obviously, this is thanks, Jean and Rachel, for the efforts of the World Bank and ADB and the PLP. We're starting that today, promoting and socializing the shared approach. But we also have in mind to start looking at developing other sort of training materials that look at specifically what are the key components of the shared approach that we talk about. So one of the things that Jean mentioned is this idea about a common procedure and method. And so we've developed a technical assistant that is looking at how we can sort of expand on that and sort of unpackage what the common approaches are and methods, and also what are the terminologies or equivalence terminologies that are that apply throughout the project life cycle of the shared approach. And so that they're important because all the partners that we serve here at PRIF, 8 of them, have obviously their own standalone environmental and social policies and standards and their own terminologies. Like Jean mentioned in the beginning, they mean the same thing. They may have they word it differently or otherwise, but we need to see what are the terminologies that are common and mean the same thing along the project life cycle. So we're rolling out that TA at the moment, and it's basically outsourcing and getting consultants to help me put that together, and then funneling that work through the environment and social working group of PRIF to get feedback from partners, and then and adjustments to that. So and then I do want to mention here that what we do here at PRIF is essentially it's really strengthening coordination among the partners. But in this case, we also try and identify our strategic added value into partners' own work and in promoting the shared approach. So Jean mentioned that the ADB has a larger safeguard program for the Pacific. And this is something that I feel is the platform that will create the maximum impact in terms of promoting the shared approach across the Pacific Island countries. And so we feel that the PRIF TA putting this together, looking at identifying the common approaches and procedures, and the list of terminologies and glossaries and all of that, that's sort of like that pairs quite well into that larger program. And I think Jean mentioned that a strategy is coming later, and that of course would help us to strengthen or build capacity across the Pacific, not just the shared approach and ENS in general as well. Thanks, Jean. I'll leave it as that. I'm talking a bit too much. Let's see if there's any questions. Thank you.
Yes, we've got Nick. Nick's raised his hand. Nick, go ahead.
Thanks, Afira. Look, at the outset, just a big hats off to Jean. Jean and Ross and I were involved from the start of this journey, and Jean shepherded it through some rough waters at times. So yeah, well played, Jean. It's great to see this living. One of the discussions we had early on in forming up the structure and content of the shared approach was how we might incorporate or make reference to the SPREP EIA guidelines, and we recognised that that was a guidance document for environmental and social assessment that was prepared by the Pacific, by the Pacific's own agency in SPREP, and that it should be a fundamental component of the shared approach. And I can't recall how the shared approach now refers to it, but it couldn't, by virtue of the various safeguard systems, it couldn't be mandated as a requirement, as a legal requirement. But I would like to bang the drum for the SPREP EIA guidelines. I think it's an excellent tool, and if followed largely as it's presented, it will cover most bases for the donor safeguard systems, putting aside the specific social safeguards policies. But I think if counterparts were to use the SPREP EIA guidelines to develop their terms of reference, and to use the tools in the back of the guideline when reviewing documents and finding out whether they are prepared in accordance with the TOR, I think it would be really helpful for you, and it would help us start to standardise instruments and environmental assessment documents. And I hope it also would be, if you follow the SPREP guidance, I hope it would also be satisfactory for most of the regulatory agencies, so the environment agencies in the Pacific. So just to give a wrap to the SPREP EIA guidelines, I think they're a great asset to you and would really help you in your journey. Over.
Couldn't agree more, Nick. And I'm hoping that what I'm now sharing is the introductory page to the shared approach, and right there it talks about SPREP and the role of those EIA guidelines. So we recognise that SPREP and those guidelines are central to practice and implementation of EIA in the Pacific, and so many people are comfortable with those guidelines. So it's entirely appropriate that the shared approach recognises that and encourages use of those guidelines. Thanks.
Thanks, Jean. And if you want to get a copy of those SPREP guidelines, you could just visit the SPREP website or the PNEA, which Ivan will share a link for shortly. Just look for it in the chat, or you can always just email us at SPREP and we'll send them to you.
I see we have Rachel, Miss Rachel online.
Hi, Ophira.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, everybody. Apologies, I was a few minutes late in joining, but I've heard sort of been online for the last 20 minutes or so, and I just wanted to really reiterate what Jean discussed in terms of the setup of this, and it being a document that's really driven by the Pacific. And you know, it's a shame that we've been a bit delayed, but we're here now, and we're really keen to be using this document. And I can see that there's nearly 80, or there's 80 of us on this call today, which is really fantastic. And I would really like to ask everybody, I guess, you know, if you're working with lenders, if you're working with people doing assessments, and if you're working in the environment and social space, I would really love it, if a plea, if you like, for you to think about this document and for you to talk about it and to ask questions about it, and to ask, if you're working with the World Bank or if you're working with the ADB, please raise it with us, because I do think this is a tool that we really want to test. As both Mia Pello and Jean mentioned, we have started using this. So even though it's a document from sort of 2019 and finalized in 2020, we have been using it, and we really want to do that more, because what we don't have at the moment, unfortunately, to share with you is sort of how it works in practice and what lessons we've learned about the benefits of it and how it can really add value to this process. But we are really keen to do that. So I would really like your help to talk to us and other development partners and anybody that you're working with, and to give us some feedback in any way that you would like about how it works and how, it's useful for you, any gaps that it might have, or anything that, you know, you find would be useful for us to understand, because this is, I think, a really useful document, but it stays a document until we put it into practice and we start to use it and we start to apply it and we start to build that common language right across the Pacific. And I think that's where the strength of this document is. This has been agreed by a lot of partners and people who are working in this region. So we really want to make sure that we're using all the effort that's gone into this and that it is useful for you. So I would really encourage you to talk about it. And now we're really happy to answer questions or have a discussion about how we might use this. But at any point in the future, if you have questions or you'd like to share feedback, I would really encourage that as well, so that we make sure that we are maximizing the use of this and really putting all of this into practice. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel. For those of you who are listening in, I've just put a link there to the shared approach document direct from the PRIF site. So in case you haven't seen it yet, you can just go into the chat and there's a link for it there. And prior to that, I also provided a link for the SPRAP EIA guidelines that Nick so kindly promoted for us. So yeah, for those of you who haven't seen either of those documents, by all means, go there and you can click on those links I've provided and download them. And please, yes, provide feedback.
You know, I'd just like to reiterate that, you know, this whole process was very much started in response to being asked so many times by Pacific Island governments, development partners, please get your act together and work more closely and harmonize your procedures, because it drives us crazy that we have to learn 8 different approaches to ENS assessment plus our own, you know. So, you know, we really, we went through this process, and as Nick said, there were choppy waters at times. It's quite hard getting 8 same but different institutions in the room and get them agreeing. So it was a bit of a, you know, it wasn't for the faint-hearted, but we're there now. And I'd really love to see you guys demanding that we operationalize this and we start using it. And so for co-finance project, there's no more discussion of the way ADB does something and how World Bank does something and DFAT does something. We're doing it per the shared approach. You guys get together, agree how you're going to do it, and then just run with it. Let us know and run with it. But we're not going through the agony of trying to learn all of the different ways and whatevers anymore.
I fully agree, Jean. Thank you. It's exactly right.
Me too. I agree.
Thanks, team. Just sending out a message to our participants if there's any questions or comments.
There's a question here from
There's
Claire.
Nick. Yeah.
I can read that out. Can you see it, Farah?
Yes. Oh, there's a question here from Claire. A question for Jean Mebello. If people are working on projects and noticing the shared approach is not being used, what should they do? Who should they go to first? Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. Well, I guess it comes down to what type of project it is. I'm assuming you're talking about a development partner finance project. And if the shared approach is not being used, I guess you could ask that development partner why they're not using the shared approach, or why they're not adopting the sort of the common methodologies and procedures put forward in the shared approach. more obviously. I know from my own experience, but this is only talking about my own experience. And we work very closely with World Bank and together on a few project nows. We've just agreed exactly how we're going to go about the due diligence. We've agreed what policy, what standards are going to apply, you know, how we're going to undertake monitoring, how we're going to undertake reviews, all of those sorts of things, and we've agreed those at the outset, and then we've just implemented. So for projects that are being financed by other development partners, I of course can't speak, but I would like to think that particularly from last year on, where ADB is involved in a project with another development partner, that we're definitely working from the shared approach. Thanks.
We
Thanks,
have
Jean.
Nick as well.
Thanks, Sophia. Just a slight tangent, just to put on people's radar that the other, I guess, sector that's going to come along where we're going to have challenges in terms of the standard approaches is OH&S. So it's firmly embedded in the new World Bank ESF, and I'm assuming therefore that ADB will probably follow that lead. But there's going to be all sorts of ways of doing things in the OH&S space. So we want to try and avoid confusion. So if we can take some lessons learned from this shared approach into that sector, that might help us. But just to put that on the radar. Over.
You know, that's a really good point, Nick. So thank you for making that. And I will say that this is what's fabulous about the shared approach from my perspective, is because it means that one development partner, where their policy might be like quite old, as ADB's is, it goes back to 2009. It's currently going through a review and update at the moment, but we're not looking to have anything new being implemented until at least well into next year. So what it means for us is we can say, yes, look, World Bank just has this new ESF. They've got all these really strong ONHS requirements, which we don't have. We're definitely going to implement those. And DFAT's got this child protection policy, which is also really important. And that actually fills a really big gap that we also have. So we'll also implement that. So it allows us to kind of mix and match across the development partners, if you like, as well. Thanks.
Can I add to that, Jean? And I'm looking at a question that Samuela has just put in the chat, which is around how this might apply to ongoing projects. And I think just to add to your response around how we might use this in practice, Jean, it probably does depend where we are in the project. I think, you know, the presentation here has sort of demonstrated that this goes throughout the project lifecycle, but it's very hard to pick this up if you're, you know, getting towards the end of your project, because a lot of it relates to the kinds of assessments you might do or different parts of the project. So it's also difficult to change legal agreements that are already in place to take this approach. That being said, I think it's always valuable to raise this in the preparation stage, so at the early part of a project, but still mention it to your counterparts on a project if you have questions about it, or if you think there's elements of this that are useful. I don't think there's ever a problem for you to talk and raise this on a project, but I do think, Samuela, to address your question directly, it is probably harder for ongoing projects to have this in the language. But if it's not done yet and there's something that's useful, then by all means, I think it's great to consider it and to raise it with the project team. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe if I may add a comment here. Sorry, folks, Coleman, dialing in from Port Moresby. Yeah, maybe I like the idea that Rachel is throwing up. I think the best suggested, I guess, a better approach would be to bring this up during the pre-planning stages of any project. In this case, like, if ADB is funding the project, why not ADB could put up those conditions at the front of the table and tell the host government or the contractors and say that, these are conditions that you should meet. And, if they cannot meet it, then how can ABB and the government work to bring the capacity of that particular contractor up to the stage to be able to meet the standards? I mean, I guess, a lot of the Pacific countries, standards are pretty low, so that'll also help bring the standards of those contractors up to a level, and also raises the awareness to this particular document that you guys are presenting. That's really good. I'm going to be part of this as well.
Thank you very much for that observation. And we definitely acknowledge that capacity development goes hand in hand with, improving and strengthening implementation of ENS risk and impacts. And that, that is why that the shared approach is, it's about the procedural aspects on one hand, but it's also about coordinated capacity development on the other hand. And that's why the World Bank, PRIF, ADB, we have got supporting programs all around capacity development aimed at all of the different stakeholders. We run environmental management planning sessions with contractors to try and strengthen their understanding of, construction stage EMP, why they're important, how you develop one, how you implement one, just trying to get some consistency there in understanding, as well as, the actual production of the documents and then implementation of them. So capacity development across the board is a really important aspect of this. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. We have a comment here from Annie. Says, thank you very much, Jean, for the great presentation. And thank you, Rach, for answering my question before I asked whether we who are tasked with carrying out environmental and social assessments should be the ones raising or promoting the use of shared approach during the project planning phase, if not initiated by donor or project coordinator. So I guess that was answered, unless any other further comments from our panel.
Ophira, just to answer that, look, there's a lot of you on this call, and it's absolutely wonderful to have so many of you. I'm not familiar with everybody, so I'm sure there's a very big variety of roles that people are playing on and the different work that they're doing. Anybody can talk about this. I'm really pleased that we have this opportunity to share this with you and to make it clear, how we're going to be using it. So I'm honestly, Annie, happy for anybody to talk about it. I do think it will have more resonance with sort of ENS specialists working on project, but anybody who's interested in working in this space can certainly find some value, I hope, in the document and raise it with anybody that you're working with. So I'm happy for it to happen, to come from any quarters. It's not limited. Thanks.
Thanks, Rach. We have a question here from Carmine. How are the elements of an EIA enforceable within a PIC where the PIC may not have relevant legislation, regulations, etc. in place in support of EIA requirements or conditions?
Well, the short answer is, again, it comes down to what sort of situation you're talking about. If it's a development partner finance project, then the development partner would insist that their policies are implemented in lieu of the country, if the country doesn't have any legal requirements themselves. But if it's a government finance project, something that the government's doing on its own, I guess it would just come down to the strength of the regulatory agency in requiring best practice be implemented. I'll leave it there, see if anybody else has anything else to contribute, any observations or thoughts on that very good question.
Gina, I'm happy to jump in. I agree. It's a great question. And in a way, this is how I'm sure many of you who work with, I'll talk about myself as the World Bank. When you work with the World Bank, this is often the case, that we require things of you that aren't particularly included in regulations across, you know, different countries. And it is sort of part and parcel, I guess, of working with donors like ourselves, that there are some issues that don't have a natural home in a country, but that are part of our standards and policies. And I guess this doesn't change that, but it is also trying to recognize the importance of those country standards, because any of you developing projects in your own countries, you have to meet those rules and regulations. And it's something that we know, that we acknowledge, but we wanted to make sure that that was prominent in this document, because it is something that, you know, is easy to miss when you're working with our standards, which cover, you know, all of the projects that we do globally. So it's really an acknowledgement of the importance of those systems, even though there may be occasions when there are things either in the shared approach or within individual lender policies that are slightly different. So they both still apply, but this is hoping to highlight the importance of the home regulation as well. I hope that's, I've captured the crux of your question, Caroline.
Thanks, Rach. We have another question here from Marista Capini. It says, if a project is financed by a single donor, how does this shared approach is applied? Will it be a shared approach between the CSS and the donor's safeguards requirements?
I'll go first, and then I can see Rach is wanting to jump in, and I think Nick even might have something to say on this. I would like to think, this again is just speaking very much from my own perspective, that would always be the case, that it would be a matter of what I refer to as CSS plus, meaning you're working from the country system requirements, then plus anything additional that development partner has in their policy that also needs to be implemented. So the shared approach would still have importance, particularly when you're referring to those tools and instruments which we all know well by certain names, but for some weird reason ADB refers to it as an initial environmental examination or something odd like that. You know, let's just talk about what we're talking about, and it's an environmental assessment, you know. So I would like to think that the shared approach would still make sense, even just if it was one single development partner working and partnering with a Pacific Island country. Thanks.
Thanks, Jane. I fully agree. I think that one of the benefits, I think, of the shared approach is that it outlines a process and sort of puts it into context for the project cycle. So I think from a process perspective, it's still very relevant. And I would still like to think, in fact, I know again from my personal experience, I'm very happy to use shared approach language in the projects that we would prepare in future, and to use this as a process document to make sure that, you know, it becomes something that we use on a day-to-day basis. There may be issues. In fact, I know there are issues in this document that are not reflected here that are in World Bank policy. So we still need to add those. But from a process and a language and a respect perspective, you know, I think it is very much, it can still be at the center of the ENS assessment and the instruments that would apply to a project. Thanks.
Nick, did you want to add something?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I think one of the other aspects, another thing that we were conscious of with the shared approach, and Jean pointed this out in the and no doubt you are critically concerned about the jargon that you're faced with when you do things day to day from the various donors, and the semantics, the different terminology that's used. So we hope that the shared approach will over time allow you to recognise that the instrument you're preparing for resettlement under the ADB SPS is pretty much the same as the one you're preparing under the ESF or for DFAT or whatever, and it's just called something different. So fundamentally the structure is the same. So if you put it together based on what you've done previously, and with reference to the shared approach, that I think you'll probably realise that 99% of this is the same. Yeah, the confusion lies in how it's described and the words that are used for various institutions. So we hope that the shared approach might be sort of like a glossary or a dictionary or almost an encyclopedia of what the various donors are doing and help.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Rachel. We have a few questions here in our chat box, so I think I'll just make a move on those. We have a question from Claire Forbes from Bello. When should people expect to get some guidance or further resources on common terminology advocated for by the shared approach that they may be able to start to implement in their own roles?
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Ophira. Listen, to be honest with you, I want the answer to say very, very soon, but I've just talked about, we're rolling out a TA specifically for this assignment, and we're really at the early stages. Once we get the consultants on board, I'm hoping to start putting the drafts together. And most of our stuff had to be channeled through the Environment and Social Working Group, which meets every quarter. So I would like to have completed that just in time for the second meeting of the Environment and Social Working Group. So we're looking at probably a month or two for drafts. Thanks.
All right, thanks for that, Mepelo. Our other question is from Malachi. Would it be possible to use and cite the shared approach, EIA and SIA methodology frameworks as part of academic research proposal projects in river watershed? Team?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go Rach.
Yeah, no, I think the more we use this, the more people will be aware of it. So that would be great, Malachi. Thanks.
It certainly doesn't matter what sector a developmental project is in, because we're talking about a process. So I would say though that just thinking about watersheds, the shared approach it's not really a strategic environmental assessment tool. It's very much more project specific. So at a watershed or catchment level, you might be more appropriately looking at a strategic kind of assessment approach. So the shared approach wouldn't necessarily fit with that, but definitely a project within a watershed, absolutely no reason why not. Thanks.
Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, look, and just to add to that, look, I think one thing we love doing as a sort of a donor collective, and probably a donor collective, is reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of tools out there for catchment approaches. There's ridge to reef that are established in the Pacific already. So we don't need something new. I mean, in the same way as the SPREP EIA guidelines, look, they're 99% there in terms of their technical approach. There's other things you can add on to them for sure. But they're fairly light on social impact assessment, and there's obviously the resettlement part. But don't feel like we have to reinvent them. They're 99% there. So if we're going to do something brand new, it's got to add a significant value. So look at what's been done in the past, and people are most likely to be familiar with that. If you give them something new, then they've got to first figure out why it's new and how it compares to the previous effort. So yeah, look, I counsel on that. It's a big source of confusion.
Testing. Did we just lose Nick?
His mic's gone mute. He might have accidentally knocked it. He's still there.
I'm going to have to apologise now, colleagues. I'm very sorry that I have to go, but I've got to get going to another meeting that's due to start in a couple of minutes, and I've got to do a little bit of prep for it. I feel like I've been in the hot seat all day today, jumping from one meeting to another. But I've very much enjoyed spending time with you this afternoon. And as Rachel says, we hope to see some real demand for a shared approach to screening and assessment of project impacts from now on. So I'll say cheerio, and I will see you another time. Bye all.
Thank you so much, Jean.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jean.
Thanks, Jean.
Bye.
Okay, so where were we with that question? Did Nick finish answering that question, or did
Nick, if
Nick-
you could just
oh,
give
there
us a
you go.
thumbs up that you'd finished.
Yeah, I hope I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just
All right, thanks for that, Nick. Our next question here is from Margaret. Sorry, did we already? Yeah, Margaret. How can we get regulatory agencies or governments to adopt the shared approach for all development projects? From Margaret Rimoni. Thank you, guys.
I'll tackle that one. If anybody else wants to come in, please do so. Look, you know, it is a challenge, Margaret, and it's, I guess, while we really believe that the shared approach will be really useful, you know, it's certainly not the bank. I speak for the World Bank. It's not our responsibility to override or enforce a government to adopt particular legislation. So it's difficult, but I think the more we use it and perhaps demonstrating the value of it, whether it be on donor projects or not, there's a lot in here that will be valuable. And, you know, I think I would encourage people to sort of raise it as a useful tool if that's what it is. And, you know, work through whatever systems you can to adopt some of the processes that are included in the shared approach, even if it's not necessarily in the regulation. There's possibly space in the project cycle, for example, to encourage particular activities to take place. So if there's something that is useful, then I would encourage you to use it, you know, when it adds value to your projects. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. Greg here from SPREP. And yeah, just to add into that, so just the same with the SPREP guidelines, for governments with pre-existing legislation, we can't enforce our own will upon them on what we require them to do on projects. The guidelines, and it's with the shared approach, when they're not on donor projects, it's going to be up to the governments and the regulators of what they want to take out of this. So the best way for them to adopt it is for it to be demonstrated to be worthwhile when we use it on projects. So when we're using it on donor projects and we show that it's doing a good job, that's the lessons learned that people take out, and then they're more inclined to use it going forward for non-donor projects. So that, in my opinion, is probably the best way to go ahead doing it. But yeah, we can't go around telling governments what to do. That they have their own legislation. But yes, this is a great initiative.
I guess from us here at PRIF as well, because like we don't really fund any infrastructure projects. I mean, that's the main task of our development partners. What we've, you know, we follow the shared approach has been sort of commissioned through us, but the negotiations and conversation happening bilaterally with the countries are precisely as Rachel said. It's between the partners. or partner and the country and whatever set of rules that they agree to. And if the shared approach is something that they find useful, and then that is also that's very good. I'm always thinking about the beginning of when you're setting up a new project, and how do we sort of ensure that the benefit that the shared approach can be considered at the table between the government decision makers and those other development partners. Obviously, because the rules that are agreed to in the beginning define how things get done throughout the project lifecycle. So the shared approach, as I said, is something that if folks deem valuable, and part of our work as well is to promote that and socialize that as much as possible. Obviously, we're successful if countries, Pacific Island countries, the level of understanding and awareness have improved greatly because of our communication campaigns and what we're doing, not just within PRIF, but mostly through the development partners. Then obviously the countries would find the value would learn about the value of the shared approach enough for them to agree to pilot this. But again, this is largely deferred to the partners themselves and how they negotiate the countries for projects. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Piera. Look, my view would be somewhat contrary to that, and I would be saying to shield the country regulators from the shared approach. It's the donors system. They're the day-to-day regulators. They should be, and they're very low capacity, as we've fully recognised, and they should be allowed to do their job with their system. And those systems should be used. So I think the first port of call for any project is that we start with the country system, and I think maybe Jean or Rach said this earlier, and then patch on what is required by the donors. So country systems will only be improved through use. So if we seek to impose the donor systems on the country system, they'll just disappear. So I think we really need to work with the regulators, use their country systems to, well, and in many cases, elements of the country system are not enacted in as much rigor as they perhaps ought to be. So I think the onus is on us through development projects to make sure all of the elements of a regulatory system are enacted in a country system, and then work, and this is the job of consultants such as Margaret and myself and many others. It's our job then to provide the nexus and the connection and the interpretive nexus through to the donor safeguard systems. So I don't think we should be burdening the country regulators. They've already got an enormous amount on their plate, and we really need to have the country systems at the forefront. Over.
May I just add in this discussion, I really agree with what's been shared here, because that's also my experience. And I love how Jean and her presentation shared that the shared approach is about focusing on the gaps. And she also made a comment here in the chat box. She says that is what I refer to as the back of house stuff. As development partners, we need to not overwhelm PICs with our needs and requirements, but put CSS, country safeguard systems, first. So that's really good. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so moving on to our next question. This is a comment from Sally Pita. She says, this is a great initiative to have a shared approach based on the CSS, which is a baseline for each PICs. This will really aid the common language used for the development partners as well as the national governments. We have a comment here from Hilary Tanielu. She works for LTA. Hi, Hilary. Thank you for the informative presentation on this great initiative. Just wanted to ask, please, is there a forum at the higher donor level to discuss the shared approach to be agreed across the board before filtering down to accredited entities, government stakeholders, to be utilized as a guideline or requirement? Speaking from current experience with GEF and GCF projects, mainly focusing on infrastructural solutions to combat climate change impacts, there were quite a few delays implementing the projects due to unclear safeguard guidelines between the accredited entity through which the funding was made available and the donors. I guess it would be easier if it was clear-cut from the donor to adopt this shared approach to mitigate safeguarding issues during all phases of the project. That's a great question and comment. Can we have someone from our panel to answer?
I'll take a go at this, but Hilary, if you're still online, it would be really interesting just to sort of hear your experience of this. I don't think there's an absolute sort of panel that can make this decision per se. I think where I would start is that the PRIF members have all agreed this, so there shouldn't be any significant pushback or challenge from any of the PRIF members in the application of the shared approach. When it comes to the individual project level, that's where the discussions take place. But again, if all the partners have previously agreed to this, then it doesn't override or contradict any of our standards. So I'm not anticipating there to be any challenge with that. In terms of the GEF or the GCF, I'm not sure in the process of developing the shared approach whether we have reached out to them specifically or whether we have shared this document with them specifically. But obviously they also have their own requirements, and none are members of the PRIF. So it may come as a new document to them and they may not be particularly familiar with it, but I would encourage you to share it with them. And if there's a need for them to sort of get up to speed or to learn a bit more about this, I would suggest that PRIF is probably the first partner to reach out to, but certainly others can help support you in that if you think that's a valuable document for you to be referencing. I'm not sure if that's fully answered your question. So if you do want to sort of expand or speak to that, please feel free to open your mic and share with us.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Sorry, I've just been having a few technical difficulties on my side trying to connect to the meeting again, so I didn't catch the first half of your answer. But yeah, so my question was mainly capitalizing on inclusiveness of other donors, especially new donors, I guess, such as Green Climate Fund, Global Environmental Facility, who I don't really see on that list of PRIF donor partners, and if they can, if there is a forum that includes all of these donors so they're aware of these great initiatives and also be able to implement those with their own projects that they're funding for different Pacific countries. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. There isn't a single place where everybody comes together. The PRIF partners, they obviously come together through the PRIF, but at this stage, the membership of that is as it is in the GCF, and others are not sort of party to that. So I'm not aware of any particular forum that brings everybody together, but it's certainly part of the work PRIF is doing. And maybe Mia Pele wants to speak to this, or obviously it's ongoing, but they will be helping to roll this out and publicize the document. So I'm hoping that through that process, it will receive a little bit more attention and allow others to become more familiar with it. Thanks.
Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, look, I think I'd just add there, and I'm not sure which entities that you're referring to, Hilary, perhaps it's UNDP and the likes, but I think most of them should have systems that are pretty much aligned with the multilateral donors. But look, if there's a situation where you have one of the UN agencies or another donor that, and there's irreconcilable differences with our sort of side of, or PRIF members, yeah, look, I think bring it to the attention of the PRIF Secretariat. we all should be adopting a cooperative approach to this. We shouldn't just be arguing amongst ourselves about our various systems. So I think we would, in the spirit of this common approach and all the PRIF members that have been engaged with it, we want to resolve problems, not create more. So yeah, look, if there's a conflict or something that can't be resolved, perhaps that's a way to mediate it, is to suggest that, look, can we direct that to the PRIF Secretariat in the first instance, and then see if we can't resolve it then, rather than engaging in this sort of back and forwards and causing project delays. Over.
Yeah, thanks. For me, from the PRIF side, this is the sort of experience that I think the shared approach would help countries to address. The experience you have with Jeff and GCF, although they're not part of the PRIF partnership, but like I said, the shared approach it has its own value, and that is bringing folks together on an agreed pathway, using an agreed common method and procedure on how to implement their environmental and social sustainable management across the project lifecycle. Now, I'd like to believe that when part of the success story that will come out from countries adopting the shared approach would be that they could also advocate for the shared approach with other donors that they engage with. Now, in this instance, you are referring to Jeff and GCF. So when the shared approach and the value of shared approach, having gone through it, implemented, and realizing it's how it helps countries to enhance effectiveness and efficiency, then countries would start to advocate for this more. And I think that is sort of like the long-term outcome that we hope would achieve. But in terms of your specific question, whether there's a forum, I can't speak to that. For us here at the PRIF, it's the PRIF Management Committee, comprising of the delegates from the partners that makes decision for PRIF. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. I am mindful that we are almost out of time, but we have some really good comments and a few more questions in our chat box. I have been told that we can continue discussions in the PNEA portal for any further questions coming our way. But just Greg? Is Greg there?
Yes, I am here. Sorry, I was
Okay,
trying
Greg.
to unmute my mic.
Okay.
Yes, so we Ivan will circulate the link to the PNEA for those of you who aren't already registered on the PNEA. It's a pretty straightforward process, and if you apply, because we've got your details, it'll be even quicker, because Ivan can quickly add you to it as soon as you register your details, and then you can just log in there and start posting your questions to the forum, and members of the panel and others can join in and add their thoughts.
Yes, that's a good plan. Okay.
And we also have another meeting coming up next week, but I'll leave that to you to refer to promote.
All right. Well, if there are no further comments from our panelists and our team, our support team, I would like to say whakataitele to our presenters for this wonderful session. Unfortunately, we have 5 more minutes to go, so we have to close this up. So thank you very much to Ms. Jean, Ms. Rachel, and Mr. Merpello, and also Nick. Nick, thank you for your very valuable input into our discussion today. I have learned so much, and I believe the same for all our participants.
Pleasure.
You there? Okay.
My pleasure. My pleasure. My pleasure.
You take care, Nick.
Just another reminder Fa'amole Lava to all our participants. I see here that we had 70, we had 80 at one point joining our session today, and that's a very high number for our training so
Actually,
far.
I think we topped 82 at one point, but
Oh,
we may have
wow.
even gone higher than that. But Ivan will have the full log later. You can.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So just a reminder to all our participants, please click on the Survey Monkey link that Ivan, please can you share that in our chat box? And that will also be emailed to you. Please fill in that evaluation form and submit to us as soon as you can. We would love to hear your feedback and build on from there many more excellent opportunities like this one that we just had today. And also remember to download PowerPoint presentations and watch our uploaded videos of training sessions on the PNEA portal. And now I'll just hand it over to Greg. Greg, are you, will you do our closing remarks for Mole Mole, sir?
Sure, I can do that. Thank you very much. Just before I do that, for those of you I have just been checking in the chat, there's a few of you who have tried the link and it's not working to join the PNEA, to go into the chat room. If it's saying access denied, it's because you're either not logged in or you're not already a member. So if you are a member, please log in through the login and then you can go into the chat. And if you're not already a member, click join the PNEA and then fill in the registration details and Ivan will give you access. It's just a couple of little steps to do that, but that should be straightforward. Thank you all for coming. And yes, thank you so much to everyone and all the presenters and all of your fantastic questions from you who've been listening in from across the Pacific. Fantastic start to our third sessions of the PLP, and let's hope that this is not the last round of sessions. We will try and look to see if we can do a fourth round and fifth and further. Won't we, Rachel? Yes. We will look at that. Yeah. So yeah, fantastic start to the year. Sorry for the delay in the start today and also in the weeks that we did have a few delays. We had to onboard Ofera and we are very grateful for having her there. Apologies to those of you. I am no longer in the Pacific for the time being. I'm stranded in Australia, but I will be trying to return as soon as possible. Looking forward to you all joining, and please spread the word to your colleagues to join the following sessions. Next week's session will be a fantastic one. It's going to be presented by a very good friend of mine, Professor Richard Morgan, and also another good friend, Dr. Nick Taylor, two specialists and experts. You can call these guys experts in their field. Both presidents of NZIA at different times, and Professor Morgan, a lifetime member of IAAA and former president of IAAA, which is the International Impact Association. So these guys set the standards in what they do. Really will be interesting. And they're going to be talking about cumulative impact assessment, which is something that in the Pacific is becoming more and more interesting and useful because we have to consider the impacts of other developments and the long-term impacts of our development on other developments and vice versa. So it will be really good. They literally have written a book on this. So it should be great. Look forward to seeing you all there. Please take care in your respective locations. We know there's a lot of lockdowns and COVID issues going on in Samoa as they deal with the situation there, and we pray that things will resolve themselves. And for those of you in other countries that are suffering similar plights, our hearts go out to you. And thank you so much again, Nick, for signing in from Lord Howe Island, where you are currently in COVID isolation after testing positive on your holiday. So big thanks to you joining on your holiday, mate. Take care.
COVID's nothing, mate. Let's go.
Okay.
See you.
Yes.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thanks,
Right,
everyone.
and take care.
Thanks,
All the
Vera.
best.
Care.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.